Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review A Complete Unknown, and this is the new biopic about Bob Dylan starring Timothée Chalamet and from director James Mangold. And this film focuses on a specific set of years in Dylan's life from when he arrives in New York looking for Woody Guthrie and all the way up to his monumental performance at the Newport Music Festival and when he decided to go electric, which was a big monumental shift in music at that point, especially in the legacy of folk music. And this film has that beautiful old school Hollywood studio filmmaking feel that I feel like only James Mangold can capture in today's landscape of movies. And he has such a very specific eye and what he's trying to do. He's did this with Ford v Ferrari, with Walk the Line, 3:10 to Yuma. You feel there's a texture, there is a experience, there is a specific look to his films that look like, wow, this feels like this was like a big sprawling best picture kind of film that you would have gotten decades ago. And I appreciate that kind of nostalgic lens of filmmaking that really work for this time period. And Phaedon Papamichael, who's the cinematographer, captures something very gorgeous with this film. Every shot is so meaningful in terms of how the camera moves, how everything is framed, the angles of how it's capturing a character, and exactly how it captures their reaction to something. There's rich shadows and lighting in this film. There's a richness and texture to every single shot in the film. This feels like we're watching film. And I love that kind of feel to this story because this does take us back to a time where this was the early to mid 60s and seeing such big change in society. And this film transcends just being about Bob Dylan. It really captures the whole entire landscape of folk music and American music and culture and this shift. And Dylan represents that agent of change. And what's fascinating about this film is so much of it is done through reactionary shots of people around Bob Dylan. Because Bob Dylan has always been an enigma. He never has been that kind of artist that we know them. We know their backstory, we know their influences. And this film really knows how to capture and reinforce that idea. And a lot of that comes from Timothée Chalamet's performance, who we see so many gears moving in this performance, but we never see behind the curtain. And I think that's important because Chalamet is able to keep a distance. He's able to have this presentation of his character where we see talent, we see emotion, but we don't have understanding. And I think that's important in this fixture in how everybody else around him engages, because you have Chalamet as Dylan, who is able to balance a confidence, a passion for his music, a connection with his music, but also a disconnect with society around him, his body language and how he keeps himself small, and how he fits into any kind of situation. And you feel that he is an agent of change and progress throughout this film, and whether it's how his music keeps evolving and how he feels just confined and latched in and put into a box if he isn't allowed to freely explore his own expression. And I think this film captures that so perfectly, and you see it in his relationships. Dylan's not presented as good or bad in this film. It's just, this is how he is. And how he is very hard to be with, and how he is very hard to connect with. And you see that in his two relationships, as you have Sylvie Russo, played by Elle Fanning, who is an artist who's trying to be an agent of change, be part of these movements, and she sees how effortlessly, or it seems like it's so effortlessly, Bob is able to do that with his music and his passion and with his talent. And you see how Sylvie evolves throughout this film, trying to come up and out of this shadow, trying to get off of this merry-go-round, this circus. As Bob keeps saying, like, he learned all these things in the circus, but you never know what's really true or not. Then, I think Fanning gives a really fantastic performance, but Monica Barbaro, who plays Joan Baez, that connection is so fascinating because there's a passion through music that becomes sexual. There's a passion through music that becomes a partnership. And Joan is the face of folk music and this big star that Bob quickly overshoots. But Bob's not satisfied with being in this one place. And there's that conflict between Bob and Joan throughout this film. And you see it evolve. And Barbaro does an amazing job with her performance. Anytime she's watching Bob Dylan perform, there are so many emotions and things that you can see going behind the scenes. I think Scoot McNairy's fantastic as Woody Guthrie, who has to give a very physical performance as he is ailing. Edward Norton's character, Pete Seeger, is such a fascinating figure in this film, and his stringent focus on folk music and the tradition of it. And Norton gives such a dynamic performance here as well, and you see his relationship with Bob evolve throughout these years. And he has to grow. He wants Bob Dylan in the spotlight to grow the spotlight of folk music, but he doesn't want Bob to keep growing, and that's the challenge. You have Boyd Holbrook, who I think gives us such a great performance as Johnny Cash, and Dan Fogler's a fun presence in this film. There's a lot of really great supporting performances. This film is at its peak when it's showing musical performances. The staging, the blocking, how all of that's brought to life. The actual performers, because everybody does their own performing. Chalamet, Barbaro, Holbrook are all doing fantastic jobs. Norton with their singing, their performances, the acting performances, but then the musical performances. And this film is told, its story is so embedded in music and feels like it's not a musical because, they're performing, but this film is so deeply rooted in music. Its storytelling, its themes, everything is explored through these musical performances. And there's so much character growth in those performances, whether it's who is performing, and a lot of the time it's Bob Dylan performing, and how everybody else around him is growing based off of these iconic songs and this energy, this presence that he's able to bring. This is a fascinating, dynamic biopic that transcends that stereotype of what Walk the Line, which then led into Walk Hard, created in terms of biopics. And this is James Mangold too. He's able to transcend that and capture something so dynamic, thematically dense, and incredibly well performed, beautifully shot, and just pull this all together. This does not feel like 2 hours and 20 minutes. Sure, there's moments where you're kind of just sitting there listening to people talk about, this is what folk music is. But when you hear the music, that is where this film transcends. And this is such a dynamic and engaging film, and is one of the best films of the year. But those are my thoughts on A Complete Unknown. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.